My name is Larissa Beckstead. I am a SPED parent of a senior at Chaparral. I'll be running the Zoom tonight. So if you have any questions as the presentation is going on, please feel free to put them in the chat and then I will ask them at the end. We do have about 7 people in person, so they will be interacting and asking questions. So if you hear their question and you want to do a follow-up question, please feel free to put it in the chat. And as Dr. Gruen showed us in the chat, she introduced herself. So please feel free to introduce yourself and tell us about your child, what grade level, what school they are at. Okay. Do we want to, please don't. Linda, do we want to wait 1 more minute and then start? And then as people come in, I can let them in. Do we want to wait until 6:05 and start at 6:05?
How many do we have now?
There's 16 people online we have right now.
Okay, I'm at 6:04 anyway, so should we get started?
Yeah, let's go ahead.
Okay. It's a little different for me because I'm talking to people in person, but I can't see you all at home. So it's kind of surreal, but I'm just going to start with an introduction. I'm Marge Rehberg, the Executive Director for Special Education here in Scottsdale, and hopefully I had the opportunity to meet you last time we met, but then for those of you that are now newly joining us, welcome, welcome. We're really trying to grow our group here of families with students with special education services. So for the rest of my team, instead of walking around, I'm just going to introduce Kathy Devers. She's a coordinator here with us, and she's my co-presenter tonight. And Linda Brake, who's our Director of Special Education, and our wonderful assistant, Marcy Moreno, who's also here with us tonight. And then our other co-parent committee members, Robin Kraut and Amanda. Right, I get the name right. Okay, so welcome. So one of the topics that when we had talked with families last time that came up as something to learn more about was the IEP process, the Individualized Education Plan. And my first disclaimer is that if you're at an IEP meeting, you're already part of the team now. Your child has been found eligible for special education under one of the categories, under one of the 13 or more 13 categories, but they may be eligible for more than one. But they have gone through the evaluation process, which I was thinking about last night. We can do that too, which is kind of, you're getting the horse and then the cart. But many of you have been through the evaluation process. So I think there's more questions about the IEP process and the meetings, because that's what you do at least annually. So we know it's something people spend a lot of time in IEP meetings. So we really wanted to talk about that. Kathy and I have done this presentation before, and we really enjoyed this as an interactive activity where we asked people to share some of their experiences that they've had with IEP meetings. And it's been amazing. They're all going into the book we're going to write, the things that people have shared that have happened. And then I really like the one about an IEP went well once because. So identify a time if you can, and we're going to ask people to share out at the end of the presentation. Okay, I think I'm ready for the next slide.
Okay. Oh, who's running it? I'm not sharing.
Okay, then I'm going to pick up my clicker.
Okay.
There we go. So again, IEP stands for Individualized Education Plan, and it's why we lead an IEP team with purpose. We're trying to create and foster confident and secure relationships. We're all about building that relationships with the parent as part of the team, the family. We share the responsibility for the process and the results. We try to always stay student focused. We try to use good communication skills to listen and to reach consensus. Sometimes that's difficult because we all come from different perspectives, as a parent, as the special education teacher, as the general education teacher, but trying to come to that remaining student focus, what's best for the student. So the objectives in the IEP meeting, these are the parts we're going to dig into tonight. You're going to review the present levels of performance, what is your child currently doing, create meaningful and achievable goals, and again, that's for 1 year. Typically, you're writing goals for what's obtainable for in the next coming year. If maybe it's not always easy to hit the target exactly, because children don't take this just straight line in growth. So sometimes maybe you've met the goals and the team needs to reconvene and set new ones. Sometimes you don't meet them in a year. So when you come back, we need to look at the goals and say, why didn't we reach them? Do we need to tweak them? We don't want to just leave them and roll them over. We want to look at, like, was the bar too high? Did we set the criteria like at 90%? He's only at 50, and now he's at 70, so then maybe we need to adjust that. We're going to plan specially designed instruction, which is what the special education services are all about. What's different than general education? We're going to talk about related services. Those are the auxiliary services your child might receive to support them towards their goals, and personnel support required for success. And finally, and this is sometimes the biggie, we agree to educational placement. Where are those services going to happen? After we've talked about the strengths and challenges, we've written some really good goals that are meaningful, we've talked about what services they need, and then finally the biggie is, where are we going to deliver these services? And that's actually can be about program or level of service, but also then about location, because not always are all programs at all locations. Why lead an effective IEP meeting? This is my favorite slide because it's why do we want to be so effective, and why do we use the facilitated IEP process here in SUSD? It's encouraged across the state. Due process is costly. If any of you have ever been involved in either side of the table, when you get to litigation, you are spending all kinds of resources, either the district is or the family is. And if it's something that we can resolve without doing that, we want to exhaust all efforts to resolve the process amongst ourselves. I usually, say to parents, here's your 12, now it's much bigger, the procedural safeguards, that packet of things, and I'd say, you know what, I can read it to you if you need help. I said, or you could just call me and we could figure it out together, whatever the conflict is. Ineffective meetings yield conflict. We've seen this time over time in districts that I've worked in. It affects, sometimes it takes a long time to heal those things that had happened in conflicted meetings when you don't get them resolved. It affects, maybe you have siblings and now you're worried about your next child, and even amongst, and from the staff side, there's people are just like, I've had it, I'm done, this is too hard. Of course, employees want to be happy and not have to be in conflict all the time with the families that they're trying to work with. So we really want those, and unintended consequences. People leave, families are unhappy, they leave. So there's all kinds of reasons why we want this to be an effective process and not have it go sideways. So we're really trying to make an effort with our staff and making the meetings run smoothly, using a lot of the things we're going to talk about tonight, the tools, and really it's our expectation across the district that they use these tools and run the meetings to be effective. What do we talk about also in an IEP meeting? Least restrictive environment. LRE, you'll hear it, should be addressed at every meeting, and it's never supposed to be predetermined. There should never be where somebody's walked in or already decided, and yet, we all come in with ideas, we're human. I think the best place for my child is this. But then, you know, after you've heard this or you've had a discussion with the team, maybe you're like, well, maybe I need to consider that too. Or maybe I need to look at that if it's something that it wasn't something you hadn't been intending on going into the meeting. And sometimes it's between two, you know, where we're talking about it might be this level and it might be this level. So why don't we talk about visiting both, which is really the best fit. So, but that discussion every time, because the law is to the maximum extent appropriate, children with disabilities are educated with children who are non-disabled. Okay? And the removal should only occur if the nature and severity of the disability is such that education in regular class with the use of aids and services can't be achieved satisfactorily. Now, at the other end, though, you need to understand that little part where it says the severity of the disability. So there is a point where there might be a child who's not appropriate to be in general education, and the school is not necessarily have to change the whole program or the whole makeup of the general education class, but we are on the hook to the extent possible that we can provide that child with success in the classroom by using the supplementary aids and our services pushing into the gen ed classroom. So that's supposed to be where you start the conversation, except the rare case, I have been in meetings with families who have been in special education for a long, long time, and I would never be hurtful enough to start a conversation with them at general education when we know that's not even a possibility, okay? But we do talk about least restrictive, you know, could they move up or down on the continuum? Keys for success, what we're striving for is that we share this responsibility with you, that we come in with a collaborative attitude, that we do some strategic planning with you, and we facilitate behaviors, because managing a lot of it is going to be about behaviors. So who are the 5 famous people that always need to be included in an IEP meeting? The interpreter of instructional implications of evaluations. Who could that be? A school psychologist. They interpret results, right? A speech and language pathologist. If your child is being evaluated for speech and language, the speech and language pathologist is likely the person that's going to review those results with you. Special education teacher. Our special education teachers are trained in assessments, and many times they're doing, especially in an annual IEP, they're updating your child's progress with assessments. So they would be the interpreter at the annual meeting if it wasn't a full-blown 3-year reeval, okay? And someone who can make connections between the evaluation results and the impact of the disability on the student's education. So that's the role. Someone that can speak in a knowledgeable way between this is what the test scores mean and how they will affect your child in the classroom. So that's one of the key players at every IEP meeting required. The LEA Representative, Local Education Association Representative. That's an administrator or their designee, and sometimes it might be the assistant principal, it could be one of our team, a lead teacher. There's someone who makes decisions when consensus cannot be reached. Okay, so the goal of the meeting is that we come to consensus, we follow all the laws and the regulations, and the team walks away and everybody's on the same page. Not always. So when that doesn't happen, that LEA rep, the person who the administrator or their designee who's charged with the meeting, is on the hook because we don't take votes ever. That person is charged with making the decision if the team can't, based on all the laws of IDEA. So in other words, and that can be a tough spot to be in, and then I think even harder is explaining to people why you've made the decision you did. And then, of course, parents always have rights after that point, too, if you believe it isn't the right decision. But that's what the LEA rep's role is. And they, most importantly, they also have the power to allocate school funding and resources. So the LEA rep, if you're talking about a placement is a big allocation of funding resources. If you're talking about a special education transportation because they need it based on their disability and to access their program, that's allocating funds. They're there to approve if the team has collected data and feels that a maybe para-educator support's needed, then that's also something that's tied to funding. So that's why there must be an LEA representative there, because we can't look around the room and go, okay, who's paying for it? We have to have a person sitting at the table who can say, yes, we need to do that. That's my role. If perhaps there was an urgent reason why they weren't there, then the team would have to table it and come back. The parent of the student. Until the student reaches 18 years old, because at that time, then the student is the one responsible for making decisions. Unless the parent has gotten guardianship to make those decisions. So we strongly encourage parents to start that process, because once the child turns 18, we can't legally have it come from you anymore. It has to come from the student. And that process sometimes takes a little while to get guardianship, and we can help you navigate that through some of our transition meetings about how to do that, because it still is a legal thing you have to go through. But the parent of the student is always invited till they're 18, and then in most school districts, we will continue to invite the parent, because mostly the child lives with them still, and as a courtesy, obviously, we still invite parents to meetings. At least one parent must be present or afforded the opportunity to participate. So we want you to understand that you're always invited, and of course, we always want you to be present. But the difficulty comes when the child's IEP is coming due, and we're on the hook to make sure that we're meeting within the year. If we've not heard from you and we've been reaching out, it may be that we're going to hold a meeting because we want your child to continue to get services. But if you reach out and say, can't make it that day, can you please reschedule? Hopefully it's before the IEP is expiring, but then we will obviously need to reschedule when you can be there. So we afford you the opportunity to participate. We have to hear back from you, okay, from some way. So we always try to email or send it home in the backpack. I'm not sure if they're still in that, that was pre-COVID days, but pretty much case managers will continue to reach out to you to make sure that your presence is requested at a meeting. And the general education teacher. And here's right from the law. The public agency must ensure that the IEP team for each child with a disability includes not less than one regular education teacher of the child. What if I want 7 of them there? Well, we'll do the best we can, but sometimes that takes a little more timing and planning, because sometimes at the high school, parents want to hear from more than one. Or we collect all the information and one teacher is there to share out. Because, it is hard to cover classrooms and get people there all together. But there will always be at least one regular education teacher there who can speak to the curriculum if the child is or may be participating in the regular education environment. So again, without predetermining, we should invite a general education teacher, because we don't know if your child's going to be going into general education or not. The only exception might be at some of our private placement facilities where the child is not going to be exposed to general education. But it does mean that we should always have one general education teacher there. And their role is to provide input on the grade level standards, so they can speak knowingly to you about, well, what does a 3rd grader do? So you can kind of judge where your child's at. Describes the needs to be successful in a general classroom environment. You need to be able to sit in your seat for 30 minutes and follow along, so they can kind of tell you, again, so you can measure maybe where your child is and where you're at progressing towards that. So what are the expectations? in the general education class. They also report data on progress within the general curriculum in all areas. So if your child is included in a general education class, then they will be the reporter on progress in that class. Education teacher. They hold state certification as a special education teacher. That's required. They work with students who have a wide range of learning, mental, emotional, and physical disabilities. A million years ago, some of us actually were trained in every area of disability, and you had a separate certificate for each area. Now they've kind of shored that up to condensed it to cross-categorical, but the training programs are required to cover all of the areas of special education, which means it's a lot. But we swap out, we know a lot about special education and disabilities, whereas a math teacher is the depth of the curriculum for math, but we're the experts on the special side. And we adapt the general education curriculum and able to teach various subjects such as reading, writing, and math, and sometimes all at the same time. If you've been in a special education class with multi-levels, you can see all of this sometimes going on. Or I laugh about having 3 or 4 reading groups within your classroom. Para's supervising a group over here, you're teaching one, bouncing between 2 others. So that's definitely the special education teacher's forte and what they do. And they teach to the skill level of all students. So we always say whoever walks through the door. So you will have a child that has, you know, the whole gamut if you're in elementary, K-8 skills, and same with high school. You know, you can have students who are still below grade level and teaching all those different levels within your classroom. Not that that doesn't happen in general education anymore, too. They understand specially designed instruction, which I'm not sure if that's on Kathy, but specially designed instruction means adapting, modifying the curriculum. So how do you make the instruction accessible to your child? With a learning disability, does it mean you're using visuals because they're a visual learner? Does it mean you're providing auditory input, or are you doing all 3? They need sensory approach. So the special education teacher is the one who understands all the specially designed instruction for the child and can speak to that. Okay, I love how they put this. Must be invited to the meeting when transition planning occurs, at a minimum before turning 16. So the IEP in which the student is turning 16 years old, they must be invited. Can they come before then? Absolutely. Many parents, though, will say, you know, I'm fine with, or let's wait till we get to placement, or let's have them there for present levels. So they're always invited. They can attend when appropriate. Sometimes it's going to be a difficult meeting and nobody needs to hear some of those things, and you can certainly go home and discuss them with your child rather than, it's also, you know, if we feel intimidated a meeting, imagine how hard it is. But then there are some where students actually present for their families at IEP meetings, and those go really well too. And they provide a personal account of needs and strengths. I love that, because especially at the high school, many times we love because we turn to the student and I'll say, what is it you think you need? And it, you know, sometimes it is very different than what the parent has just verbalized to me, but I'll say, well, now he's saying he needs this, you know, do you agree with that? So I think it really does help, especially when they're old enough to know their needs and strengths. And it teaches them how to advocate for themselves as well. We have related service providers. These are many, 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 and of course, not all students need all related services, and they are only here to support your child so they can access school. So we don't do OT-based medical services. We don't do PT medical-based. We would do PT, physical therapy, or OT for students that need that in order to access the classroom education, okay? Help holding your pencil, a slant board so you can write. It's adapting and modifying those things. So many, many things, transportation, specialized teachers for vision and hearing, school health services, what might be medical services when we have some extremely medically fragile students. Speech and language, probably the most common related service. And we do have our adapted PE teachers, orientation mobility services. Student needs to access getting around, can't see. So many, many related service providers who are also included in the IEP meeting. If they're not, then there's usually an excusal form that the provider has reached out to and explained, here's my information, can't make this meeting possibly, here's what I would be sharing, let's talk or reschedule a time when we can meet. So we really want you to understand why we meet. Our roles are to make decisions, inform families, you inform us, it's a two-way street. We plan for your child, we solve problems, we're tracking their progress every year. We team build, because after so many IEP meetings, we used to be like, oh, so good to see you again. We celebrate the successes, because hopefully there are those along the way. We learn about your child and about each other, and we make reports on how things are going. I think that's it. For me, you're not done. We can't see Larissa, but we're encouraging people to put comments in the chat, questions, because I feel like Kathy's going to take over now.
Yes, a couple people have direct messaged me, so I'm collecting their questions.
Okay.
Would you like me to share it now or later?
No, we're gonna finish the presentation and then go back. Okay, is that all right?
Sounds good.
Hi, I'm Kathy Devers, and I will start with the kind of the fun part of the IEP. So naturally, we always have to have ground rules, and that's to keep us all in line. We come together and we agree upon the behaviors of the group, because sometimes IEPs can get a little cattywampus. So then we end up creating efficacy and prevent the group from getting off track. We create a respectable atmosphere. Also, we provide boundaries, and we get agreement for those rules that we're going to put in place. So we always ask for a thumbs up. Do we agree with these? And then the biggest one we do is establish a timeline and get agreements on that, because sometimes meetings can run long. And as Marge has always told me, nothing good happens after 2 hours. So we try to get a meeting completed in an hour and a half, and if we need to, we're always ready to come back and reconvene. Oops. So then, how do we present that to the team? We always have an agenda. Does anybody want to raise their hand or say, yes, they have seen an SUSD IEP agenda at one of their meetings? Anybody? Anybody? Thank you, Marcy. Is anybody? Okay. Andrea, yeah, you've seen an agenda, and it just kind of lists out what we're going to do for the game plan, and then we're going to talk about what we're going to do in this discussion. We always want input from the whole team. It has a complete flow of topics. So you can't be talking about services until you get finished with the PLAAFP and the goals. So we make sure that we go in order and we do complete steps all the way. And it also gives us a roadmap on how to get through the IEP itself. So does anybody know what PLAAFP stands for? Anybody typing in the chat box? It changed. It used to be just PLAAFP, and then we had to go along with another A in there so that it's harder to say. So this is the present level of academic and functional performance, okay? And as you can see by all of those areas, academics, behavior, assistive technology, communication, ELL needs, hearing impairment, vision impairment, functional performance, we're looking at the whole child. We're not just looking at one part. So we always want to look at the present level, what's happening right now, and putting that in and asking parents for their input as well so that we can get a whole picture of the student both at school and at home and make our way through that to be able to paint, I always call it painting a picture, telling the story about what the student is like. So once we've got those present levels of performance, and I also encourage teachers to use their goals that they wrote on the previous IEP from the year before, close those out or kind of finish them up, and that information can go in the PLAAFP, and then it also leads towards the goals that you need to develop. And we like to do that as a team, and that is why you will get a draft of your IEP so you can take a look at the goals and get input so that we can have a collaborative meeting at the IEP so that we'll know what your concerns are or what you feel is necessary for goals that you feel that your student, your child needs to move forward. We always review all of the goals as a team. We always like to get thumbs up in our Zoom meetings or our Teams meetings now. We like to make sure that we're checking for understanding so that sometimes they get real wordy in those goals, and you know, like when you have an OT that is explaining hers and she uses all of these words that you just don't know, I want her to maybe show me what she's going to do or why she's going to do it, so that we have a clear understanding of what they're going to be working on. And then always we want it to explain why we're doing this or writing this goal so that we can refer back to the general curriculum. And it always has to connect back to the PLAAFP. If we don't go step by step, it's not a meaningful goal. Okay, so this is the magic. This is what I always talk about with the teachers is that this is your fairy dust that you are doing to make specially designed instruction work in the classroom. What are you doing in your classroom to make things easier for a child to progress in the curriculum? Some teachers don't give themselves credit for what they're doing because they just do it automatically. And they really need to think about what has been successful in their classroom. So when you look at specially designed instruction, you are adapting as appropriate to the needs of the child. You have to look at the content, the methodology, or the delivery of instruction. Those are really the most important parts of specially designed instruction, because these will end up addressing the unique needs of the student. Also, it will ensure that the student is able to access general ed curriculum. So like Marge was talking about with an SLD student, a student with speech and specific learning disability, they may need to have some things adapted. Visual schedule is good. Some students don't enjoy spelling, so cut out letters and have them put those together. That's specially designed instruction for the needs of that student. The focus of the work of special educators is to make sure that students can learn the same things that students in general education classrooms are learning. That's really the key point of why students are placed in special ed, and if they're having challenges in the general ed, what do we do? Sprinkle that fairy dust, and it's called specially designed instruction. Related services. These are services that a student would need in order to access the general ed setting. So if, like Marge was saying, for OT, you might need a slant board. For a student with visual impairment, you might need a magnifier. You might need a larger print on your computer screen. For a student with hearing impairment, you might need an interpreter, or you might need a sound field in your classroom. You just have to look at what's going to help the student become able to access his general curriculum. And then, as we have always said, the goal is to be educated with other children with disabilities and non-disabled kiddos, both. And they work wonders. I have seen the O&M specialist working with a child that has a visual impairment, and she has taught the student how to navigate without having to rely on somebody else following them from class. So that gives them a real nice feel of independence. There was a student in high school that got a guide dog, and so the O&M specialist worked with the student and the guide dog around the campus, the high school campus, so that she could begin to feel independent and didn't rely on other adults. So that's the magic of related services. Another part of the IEP is supplementary aids and services, as well as program modifications. So with supplementary aids and services, those are the things that we adapt in order to have the student be able to access the general ed curriculum. It could be assistive technology devices, it could be orientation mobility, it could be an interpreter, it also can be instructional aids or our paraeducators. And then when you're talking about program modifications, that's really when you get in there and you're starting to change the instructional level, the content or the performance criteria. So that's a bigger tweak than just simply accommodations. And then another thing we like to do is provide supports for school personnel. Sometimes you have teachers that just don't know how to have a student use a slant board to get off of a wheelchair and onto a chair in the classroom. Or if somebody has feeding tube needs, or if you have students that need to have some assistance in a bathroom. So our related services folks will provide that kind of training to meet the specific needs of the student. We don't want teachers to be injured and we don't want students to be injured. So we like to do all of that training way up at the front of the school year before everybody gets in and gets started. And then we do, these trainings should not be district-wide initiatives. Like we talked about CPI. What's CPI mean? Crisis prevention. And we do that with everybody, but a training that's done for a support for school personnel needs to meet the needs of that specific student. So. And this usually is the hardest part when we talk about placement. We look at all of the time that a student is outside of his regular ed classroom. Then we talk about the options on how to get the team together so that we can reduce that time outside of the classroom. What is it going to look like? Can we do some team teaching? Can I go in for a few minutes of a classroom, get him ready, get him started in the setting, and then leave? So how can I support the student in that type of a role? Talk about how teachers can coordinate planning efforts. Like the gen ed teacher might provide the special ed teacher with the lessons for the week or the vocabulary that the student is having difficulty with, or the science experiment that they have to do and they don't know all the parts. The special education teacher may provide the student with a visual that they can take in to the classroom. So those are the things that how the teachers could collaborate together. And then we need to always talk about the extent, the amount of time that the student is out of the gen ed classroom, and we have to do the reason why. You have to tie it back with the disability. So why is a student out of a classroom 240 minutes and not in with his gen ed classmates? What is the real reason behind that? And it always has to tie back with the special ed eligibility, the PLAAFP, and how that all comes together. So once again, it needs to tell that whole picture. Tell that story. Don't leave parts out. Do you have questions, Larissa?
I did have a question from someone wanting, could you explain the difference between a 504 and IEP plan, and how does the child qualify for a 504 versus the IEP?
Okay, great question. And I know Larissa had put that on the flyer, so I did want to address that, although my special ed hat always stays in its lane. But the 504 is an accommodation plan under the Americans with Disability Act. So it's a different legal process, but it is lifelong. Many of you know there's ADA accessibility when you go to the parking lot or the curb. So there are ways to accommodate for people's disabilities through the rest of their lives under American with Disabilities Act. So the 504 plan documents that you have a disability, but it's of the nature that it can be addressed with accommodations. So in many ways, you can have attention deficit disorder, ADHD, ADD, and you may be on medication. I have a documented disability. My doctor, has a note that says you have a prescription, your child's taking this medication. So maybe I just need some reminders in the class to refocus. So especially around noontime when you're going to get that extra booster pill. But so an accommodation plan you would request from the school. My child needs an accommodation due to the disability, medical in nature. You show them what the medical documentation, and then the 504 team, and every school site has that as well. As the parent told us, those may be run by, especially at the high school, by the assistant principal. Probably at most sites, by the assistant principal leads that team. And there would not necessarily be special education personnel involved in that. It's really towards the general education teachers, because you wouldn't be receiving any direct or specially designed instruction. So it hasn't risen to that level of needing an IEP. And since, humans are on a whole spectrum from very mild to very severe, we find that many, especially towards high school, and our success stories too are students that complete the IEP, meet their goals, and sometimes will transition in high school or when they're off to college. Like Linda said the other day, or Kathy told me, there's no IEP when you leave school. Records are destroyed after 5-6 years, and that ends. If you have a disability, though, that's documented, you could continue to receive accommodations in terms of colleges and things like that. But the IEP process ends when school ends. So Marcy brought up this really good one. Technically, could you have an IEP in a 504? And the technical answer is yes, but we say why. So once, if you have a 504 accommodation plan and maybe there's been some more evaluations or more diagnoses, you are now entering the IEP world. You need special ed support, direct services, you need OT, you need PT. The 504 would not meet those needs. So that 504 would go away because it doesn't serve a purpose anymore. We do all your accommodations in the special ed world under the IEP. So the technical answer is you could, but there's really no reason once you've entered the world of special ed to have a 504. But they're very beneficial for kids that just need that amount of support at the high school. sometimes it's students that have a processing speed issue where we're not going to pull them out of class and give them a special ed teacher. We're not going to fix the way that they process information. That's how they're wired. But we can manipulate the environment by giving them extended time, and now they're successful. So that would be a place for a 504. We had a discussion, if you have a 504 that has 200 accommodations, it might be time to have that discussion about special education, because it sounds like your needs are really greater than just being accommodation. So does that help with the difference?
Yes, it does. So would you be able to go over the qualifying categories for an IEP, or is that later in your presentation?
So the qualifiers for an IEP would actually come before the IEP. That's the evaluation process and the 13 categories of eligibility. So we can have this little exercise of standing up and remembering all 13 categories. But this is typically, it would be autism, a diagnosis of autism, learning disability, other health impairment, emotional disorder, speech language, vision, hearing, orthopedic impairment, which is like cerebral palsy or those kinds of orthopedic impairments, TBI, which is a traumatic brain injury, so there's been a drowning or that kind of event that's changed a child's life, intellectual disability, multiple disability, severe sensory, MDSSI.
Thank you. Can I ask another question?
After the evaluation, you identified that you had a disability category and that you needed special ed. So there's really two parts to it, because again, like the 504, I could have cerebral palsy, and I know many students that if they're able to access wheelchair, assistive technology, who eventually had no cognitive impairments and who were not on IEPs. I think, yeah, there's many cases, speech and language, but they didn't need any pullout, or those get stressed and they no longer need an IEP. Another question or comment?
Could we, I guess, should the teachers be giving us a draft of the IEP before the meeting for us to review, or do we have to request that? So that, because we'd all, as parents, would like to be able to come to the IEP meeting prepared and kind of, make sure we're all on the same page.
Paper or having thoughts, or even sending us feedback before the meeting, like, hey, can we add this to the goal? So yes, it should come to you and written as draft with a watermark. So, and if it comes before the meeting, obviously it is draft. So please take it that way. No decisions have been made. It's for your input and viewing, and so that you can come prepared as well. So yes, that's our gold standard, and we work hard to remind teachers and our school psychologists and our evaluators that those get.
You keep fading in and out. I noticed on the screen that it said there was weak internet connection. So we kind of missed a little bit of that, but basically you were saying we should be receiving the draft before we should receive a draft of the IEP to review before the meeting, so that we can come to the meeting with our additions and additional goals or questions or anything we have, correct?
days.
Okay, there's another question in the chat. Up here. Hold on. Okay. Sorry. How and where do I get an evaluation diagnosis for a 504 and IEP or an IEP?
So you must be suspecting that your child has a disability. So I guess it would depend on what you're suspecting. Are you expecting like an ADHD or other things? It would depend on what provider you might go to. Do you suspect your child has a vision impairment? Again, to the doctor, to the medical doctor. But those kinds of things. If you're thinking it's more of a mental health issue that they might qualify under OHI, then you would probably need to consider going to see a psychiatrist or psychologist. For an IEP, that would be what you request of your school district, because you have a suspicion that your child might have a disability. You would bring that to your school.
Okay, so Sarah, who was asking this question, she put yes, ADHD and possibly sensory processing. So then you're saying that an outside source, bring that forward. And that's, I know from my teaching experience, ADHD, we do tend to have 504s more so than IEPs for that. Is that correct?
Yes, but again, I'd caution, because it depends on the child and what kind of treatment, because sometimes we know children are very successful in school if they are being treated medically for it, but that's not our decision, that's the parent's decision. But then there are other children, because everybody's different, that may need special education under other health impairment. So it's really a range, and hard to say, it depends on the child.
Okay, so one mom, Katya, sorry, I'm sorry. Marge or Sarah, who should she reach out to ask? Because she has some very specific questions for her child.
Oh, you cut out.
The mom that's having our daughter come from a Catholic school to Saguaro next year, she has some very specific questions. So should she reach out to you or Sarah or Chelsea or Kathy?
Yes.
Okay.
Can we direct her to the SUSD website with our names and numbers? And which high school is it?
Saguaro is what she's looking at.
Okay.
Okay, I will look that and put that in the chat for you.
And Linda's number in the chat too, so you could reach out and ask specific questions.
Okay, I do not see any more questions in the chat. Anybody have a question? Yeah, I am not seeing any more questions in the chat.
So I'm being asked one here, how soon can you have your IEP? Because I did want to clarify one thing, because we're like, just ask for another meeting. There is a stipulation in the law, because go figure, sometimes there's a parent that wants to keep re-meeting and there's nothing new. So there is this stipulation in the law that something must have changed, right, on the school side or the family side in order to come to another meeting, because I can't imagine, but there were some people that would like every day, every week, so, but at least once a year.
So,
Mm-hmm.
how soon, you know,
There could be a
30-day window.
Right, we typically say 60 days before because we don't want to miss the window. They're going on vacation and then they got sick. But on the other hand, not too soon because you got a quarter left of school and you're making a decision for next year. So there can be two, especially little ones, that change. Yeah. If we don't have a question, I wanted to follow up by thanking everybody, but also advertising our next meeting that Kathy or Linda quickly look up for me, but we are presenting on those important transitions. No. Okay. Okay. January, Linda's getting the exact date for me. We are doing a redo of our first, which was Meet the Special Education Administrative Team. And did you say, Linda, it's virtual or both? It's both, in person at the MDA and virtual. And we will be sending out flyers again to make sure. But that's going to be a re-meet of the special ed administration team. And then following that, we're doing one on transitions for special education families when you're moving from elementary to middle to high. February. And then there's a special one for Panda families, the preschool families on transition. Those dates we're sending out for North and South. Okay. January 18th and February 22nd is for Panda families. And then on March, is it 31st? We are having transition fair for all the parents that are transitioning from school and beyond. So from high school, and then what opportunities and programs are out there for your students that are graduating or aging out. March 31st, that's what I thought. So we'll make sure that you will get information on all of these with our co-partners here at SPC. Marge, maybe mention. And I'm just being reminded that I need to refer you all to the Scottsdale Parent Council Special Education Facebook page. Oh my God, I saw the flyer, right? Okay, that's where tonight's flyer was. So is there anything else we needed to say, Larissa, before we sign off?
Nope, I don't think so. Let me double check here. Okay, yeah, nope, I don't think there's any other questions. Does anybody have a question before we sign off? Nope, I don't see any hands up. Well, thank you so much. We really appreciate you spending this time walking us all through this.
And thank you, because even though we can't see you and that's kind of hard, difficult, we're glad to know that we have more people attending, more and more. So we're grateful that you're all coming. Okay.
Yes, yes, we appreciate everybody able to attend.
Okay, good night.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.